One
Yeah.
thing that really struck me was the ubiquity, maybe, of the way of thinking that leads if you kind of tune into it to Tulpamancy, just even in how you at one point were like, I've got a window in the way and it doesn't want me to be able to move it. I feel like there's this kind of level of animism which just is very natural in the way that we engage with the world around us. And then that also maybe links to what you were saying later on in the talk about how we have these forged manacles, but also all consciousness and self-narration is story. So we are kind of engaging in story, whether we choose to edit that story or just accept the one that's been given us. But ultimately, I'm just really curious about your sense of the relationship between Tulpamancy, animism, and personification, and our natural predisposition to the other two, which I guess are kind of maybe further under the radar and more deeply embedded in what we conceptualize ourselves to do as humans.
Because you're absolutely right. That's exactly how humans engage in the world. We're social creatures. We personify everything and we engage with them as though, whether or not we give it ontological validity, we will engage with things as though they have their own agency. That's how people talk about their computers all the time, their printers that aren't printing, their car that won't start or whatever. It's like, why are you doing this to me? And this is the level of engagement that they have. And I think that people choose to deal with that in different ways. You have the materialist, rationalist approach where you might even still find yourself doing that, but go, we're just programmed to do that because we're social creatures. But obviously, I'm going to rationalize it away as just a kind of colorful thing that I do, that I don't believe it, obviously. But other people, myself included, and like you say, animism, they choose to run with it. They choose to accept the possibility that maybe other things do have their own autonomy or their own agency, or are actors in some sense. And actually, I think this is a position that's increasing in acceptability and popularity. Right, panpsychism's so hot right now. I know it's different from animism, but it's got a relationship to it. And I think just the argument that it's all material world, everything's physical, and consciousness is an emergent phenomenon, which is very much been presented. It certainly was to me throughout most of my life as though it's a fact. That's really been called into question because, of course, the problem of consciousness is well accepted. We actually don't know. We don't know. Maybe consciousness is fundamental. Maybe it's not an emergent phenomenon. And maybe there is something, if there's something that it's like to be a bat, as in the famous paper, maybe there's something that it's like to be a computer. Maybe there's something that it's like to be any agent or object in the world.
Well,
Any
I
entity.
suppose the idea of what it's like to be a computer crops up the entire time in all of the metaphors that Rianne was challenging in her PhD, like the brain reset metaphor, the idea that we're rewiring ourselves with psychedelics. But I think we've just maybe forgotten collectively in media about psychedelia that those were metaphors. But yeah, I feel like that's very live and kicking there.
Yeah, I think there's some complexity around it, and I think there's allowed to be some complexity. Even in the Tulpamancy community, they're very clear about the fact that, okay, they're attributing autonomy and personhood, but they're aware that they have been fabricated in some sense, right? Which is a different order of being. And I talk about this a lot with regards to entity encounters, because there's constantly these endless debates about I apologize, I'm actually going to turn my light on. There's these constant debates about the ontological validity, the ontological status. Are DMT elves real? Is it a real thing, or is it just, it seems like they're real? Are they dissociated fragments of psych and it's not the case that they're real? Yada, yada, yada. And as you and I have discussed independently, I just find this whole debate uninteresting. What interests me is what happens when you act as though they are real. What are the consequences of that? And the consequences are quite profound and exciting and interesting. And So I made the active choice to run with that and be less concerned about the extent to which it was real or not.